over time, I've created many videos focusing on one of my favorite childhood fighting games, Street Fighter X Tekken. From its DLC characters, to Pandora, to Capcom's weirdest guest fighter, the game has received plenty of coverage on my channel, but there's another aspect of the title that I've yet to cover. One baked in so much controversy that I would be surprised if you hadn't heard about it, even a decade plus after launch. Yep, the elephant in the room is the gem system, and mentioning its name will send shivers down the spines of those who remember Capcom in the early 2010s. As a new mechanic designed specifically for Street Fighter X Tekken, gems were developed to further bridge the gap between new players and their more experienced counterparts, all while helping individual characters feel more unique. On paper, this doesn't sound too bad, and efforts to make the genre more accessible for casual players are now commonplace, so what gives? Why do gems have such a blackened reputation? Well, that's what we're here to find out, so make sure to land your favorite super as we get to the bottom of Street Fighter X Tekken's gem fiasco. If you aren't in the loop, gems are a mechanic where, throughout the match, players and their characters receive temporary buffs and debuffs by reaching certain requirements. This sounds straightforward, but in reality there are over 200 gems, with each belonging to one of 5 subcategories that in turn belong to 2 major categories. There's an entire family tree of gems, so I don't blame you if you're confused. For clarity's sake, let's begin from the top and work our way down. The 2 major categories are boost gems and assist gems. The former involves what I described before about needing to fulfill mandated criteria, and the latter are passive buffs that serve to make things easier. Simpler motion inputs and the ability to automatically break throws can be equipped, although they lower your damage output and cost meter respectively. As these assist gems are solely designed for new players, we thankfully don't have to worry about them, so let's jump back to boost gems. Within this group, there are 5 classes of gems: attack, defense, speed, meter, and vitality. Their gems come in many forms, but they all serve to improve their respective elements, and it's up to you as the player to determine what you value the most. If you'd like extra health, equip some vitality gems, but if you want more meter for supers, slap some meter gems into your set. Also, each gem costs at least 1 point to equip, and as you only have 3 of these points, you have to choose your gems wisely. The most basic of these are the level 1 gems, as they're easily understandable. If you connect with normals, you'll receive a damage boost, and taking damage will increase your defense. Simple. With my team of Ryu and Kuma, I usually go all in on attack gems to increase my already high damage output, but some matchups require speed gems for Kuma to keep up. After a gem has been activated, an invisible timer will start ticking away in the background, and once it reaches 0, the gem will disappear, leaving you weakened. For example, Immense Power level 2 grants me a 20% damage buff, but I'll suffer from a 10% movement nerf after it finishes. Iron Wall level 2 functions similarly, with a 10% damage nerf compensating for a 20% damage buff. Theoretically, the idea behind this system is for players to consider how gems can alter their approach to the game without making them too strong in the long term. After all, designing gems so that they only gave you buffs and never resulted in any negative consequences just wouldn't be balanced. If you haven't caught my drift, this is exactly what Capcom has done. Gem 126's Divine Speed level 2 might sacrifice defense for speed, but 127 removes the nerf. They both last 15 seconds and only cost 1 point, so there's no reason to ever pick the former. This phenomenon doesn't apply to every gem, of course, but it happens enough to the point where it completely invalidates its lesser gems. Remember how I described Iron Wall level 2's attack nerf before? Well, all I have to do is scroll down once to have that nerf removed. Something else that doesn't make much sense to me is how different gems under the same group will have identical names, leading to many players having no idea how their opponent will activate their desired element. If I tell you that I have the Fortitude level 1 gem equipped, I could be talking about the one where you get hit by 4 normals, the one where you block 5 times, the one where you get blocked 4 times, or the one where you connect with 3 special moves. And that's not even mentioning the 8 other Fortitude level 1 gems. I understand that their identical titles stem from their identical outcomes, but their activation methods are all different. Before we move on, I would also like to add that there's nothing stopping you from only using the best gem levels. Think of it this way, you know how Capcom vs SNK 1 allocated points to every fighter and then gave you 4 points to make a team with? This led to that game's meta being defined by large yet weak teams of 4 1-point characters, whereas Street Fighter X Tekken makes some of its stronger gems cost only 1 point. In other words, why settle for a large group of weak gems when you could have a large group of powerful gems with literally no downsides? By this point, I'm sure you're starting to see why the gem system was repellent to Capcom fans, but it only gets worse from here on out. Slightly off topic, but do you recall when Capcom made use of on-disc DLC for Street Fighter X Tekken's 12 extra fighters? If you weren't around back then, let me tell you, the backlash from fans was intense, as they hated being forced to pay extra money for content that was already on the disc. There's a giant rabbit hole I can go down trying to explain how and why this took place, but what concerns us in this video is how DLC practices relate to gems. If I haven't made it clear yet, there exist exclusive gems that have to be downloaded, and to make matters worse, not all of them are free. After sleuthing through the title's Steam page, I did some math and I'm horrified to report that all the DLC gem sets cost a combined total of $44. Individually, they're $1.85 each, which by itself isn't too expensive, but for gems? Yeah, buying these would be one of the worst financial mistakes in human history. At this point, you're either thinking, I could buy food with $44, or, with there being so many gems in the base game, why would you ever need to invest in the DLC gems? Aren't the normal ones enough? To which I would agree, especially because some of the DLC packs can only be equipped for specific fighters. If you want to trick out your purple Kazuya with gems from the Street Fighter booster pack, I'm sorry to disappoint, but this is impossible. You can only apply these to the Capcom side of the roster. The mere concept of selling gems as paid DLC puts both Capcom and the player base in between a rock and a hard place, as neither party has an easy way out. The former has to convince players to buy gems that have been created to be more interesting than the base ones, but design them in a way that preserves game balance, and the latter has to decide if coughing up some extra cash to receive a potential advantage is a worthwhile investment. For many FGC diehards, becoming the quote-unquote better player through DLC gems rather than skill is blasphemous. But on the other hand, if the DLC gems aren't strong, then nobody would buy them. By now, it's obvious that there are no positive outcomes from combining gems with real-world payments, but for the sake of argument, let's say that you pull out your credit card and go on a shopping spree. What kind of advantages will you receive? Well, I'm glad you asked, as most of them are simple gems that wouldn't cause too much ruckus if used competitively. Things like increased damage, defense, speed, etc., and they, of course, lack any downsides. Honestly, these don't bother me too much, as you can find borderline interchangeable offerings for free within the base game, so even though I view them as a waste of money, they aren't egregiously offensive. On the other hand, remember when I mentioned assist gems? Without expansions, there are only a handful of these in the game, but their DLC brethren are objectively stronger and in such a way that didn't make the player base very happy. Take Auto Throw Escape Level 2 for example. Possessing at least one bar of meter makes it impossible to be thrown, which is quite the advantage, but as it costs 3 gem slots, you can never pair it up with other gems, making it very committal. However, Auto Throw Escape Level 3 only costs 2 gem slots, and you guessed right, it's DLC. Auto Block Level 3, Boost Effect Extend Level 2, and Super Boost Effect Level 2 function identically, so this isn't a one-off either. Rewarding players who pay extra money with blatantly stronger gems is so scummy that I can't help but be impressed with the Capcom staffer that approved this idea. It's about as subtle as a kick to the balls, and it's no wonder that Street Fighter X Tekken was smothered in bad press before its release. As if it were a message sent from the heavens above, I remembered that pre-order gems existed when writing this video, and I would be a fool to ignore these. I'm not gonna lie, the game special edition was really cool, and I still use the piggy bank that came with the collector's box, but its relation to gems is yet another swing and a miss. I wasn't able to uncover pre-order information for every region, but as most of the title's player base was in America, I focused on what was advertised over there. High quality screenshots have unfortunately been lost to time, but I managed to find advertisements highlighting GameStop's World Warrior Pack, Amazon's Iron Curtain Pack, and Best Buy's Lightning Legs Pack, with any pre-order bonus providing buyers with the Iron Fist and Cross Arts Pack. Like with the DLC gems, none of their pre-order counterparts had any downside, so if you didn't pre-order the game, you were missing out on some strong gems. Now to be fair, players of all skill levels could get by just fine by only using the base gems, but with how aggressively Capcom was marketing their paid cousins, I wouldn't be surprised if fans suspected that the free ones were intentionally inferior. By the way, as there's nothing stopping users from boosting the defense and speed of high health and high mobility characters, this would lead to even more time overs, which is just what the game needed, right? With all of these qualities painting a rotten picture of the gem system, it should come as no surprise that even before launch, the mechanic incited controversy within the Street Fighter community. It wasn't just that no one wanted gems in the first place, it was also that their influence over game balance wasn't made clear. Conflicting information regarding their overall power levels was all over fighting game forums, leading to former Capcom community manager Seth Killian needing to publicly clarify the ins and outs of gems in various articles. A fantastic piece on GameDeveloper.com, which I'm getting most of my information from by the way, reveals that the moment gems were announced at New York Comic Con 2011, controversy quote-unquote erupted as players were concerned over fairness and potential microtransactions. Even after finding event footage for myself, I can tell you that the crowd isn't very pleased, just to put things somewhat nicely. You know how speakers will often give the audience time to applaud after saying something amazing?
The best character for me working on this game was probably Deadpool. And the
Well, the poor Capcom staff have tried to do that here, but I don't think it went how they intended. It was moments like these that prompted the aforementioned articles to be released, forcing Capcom to enter major damage control mode. Instead of sailing the prosperous and successful seas of Street Fighter IV, their ship had been plunged into the depths of colourful gem depravity. Seth Killian went as far as to say that initially even he wasn't on board with gems, although spending more time with the game and theory crafting how the system could alter one's strategy was what made him a fan. I believe that his, and by extension Capcom's idea, was for the wider player base to experience this exact mindset once they got their hands on Street Fighter X Tekken, but the Big C unfortunately failed to consider that the internet moves at a mile a second. Once the well surrounding a title has been poisoned with negative word of mouth, it can be near impossible to purify it. Depending on which side you chose to believe, gems were either a novel idea with impactful yet reasonable influences over game balance, or they were the worst mechanic to ever exist in a fighting game, and they were single-handedly responsible for all forms of warfare in human history. In reality, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but to most people this didn't matter, as Capcom's communication just wasn't promising enough. For example, Killian states that players would be able to not choose any gems, before saying that there will not be a mode where there are no gems. So which is it? Can we play with no gems, or are we forced to use them? Another concern the FGC had involved their wallets, as they didn't want to fork over extra money for stronger gems. We already went over how this turned out in the final game, but what about before it was released? Killian returns to reveal that by New York Comic Con, Capcom hadn't figured it all out yet, although they had designed gems to balance each other out from day one. Now look, I'm not a PR guy by any means, but saying that Capcom hadn't solidified their philosophy behind what had been planned years ago couldn't have inspired confidence. It's always tough. It's one of those things where we're talking about things in sort of a measured way, and I want to be able to give people the full picture as soon as possible, and try and explain and answer everything, whereas internally we're on a different schedule. What filled the gap around some of those questions has been not good. It shows the value of when you have something to say it as completely and clearly as you can, especially if you're going in a new direction that hasn't been seen. The video game community is very astute and detail-oriented with this kind of thing, and fighting gamers are right at the top of that pile. After reading this, I actually feel bad for Seth Killian. He had no involvement in the design or long-term creative vision of the gem mechanic, but was forced to be the fall guy thanks to his job position. I can only imagine how stressed he must have been when dealing with a constant barrage of negativity from both the games media and the FGC. But with that being said, I also understand why these groups had such negative lines of questioning in the first place. The fact of the matter is that gems just weren't implemented well, and even when you read more recent forum posts, their sour taste hasn't been washed out of anyone's mouth. However, there's somewhat of a silver lining, as an Event Hub's article features an interestingly positive quote from former series producer and Blanca megafan Yoshinori Ono. With regards to that, to reflect on it now, we feel like we should have implemented it in a way that would let players play with the gems differently. At the time, we thought of it as a means to aid beginning players in leveling the playing field between them and advanced players, but in the end it might have turned out to be a little too close to a pay-to-win mechanic for comfort. It was a double-edged sword, and we knew that. In the end, we suffered greatly for our implementation, but at the same time, it was a lesson for us. We learned what the ideal to strive for should be, that would please both beginning players as well as the advanced ones. Viewing the backlash as a learning experience serves as both a great PR statement and design philosophy, as it ensures that Capcom would avoid similar mistakes in the future. This sounds like a happy ending to an otherwise bleak tale, but there's one more component of gems that I purposefully haven't mentioned yet. How do they function within tournament settings? This was the most confusing portion for me to research, as there have been countless tournaments that featured Street Fighter X Tekken. From majors that are now over a decade old to relatively recent online events, attempting to understand how all of them touched on gems is enough to make my head spin. But after scouring through old message boards, I think I'm ready to understand all the madness. In the very beginning, many community members opted to ban them entirely, with the infamous EVO 2012 adopting this mindset. Later, in 2013, gems were allowed, albeit under strict conditions, as players could choose one of 5 gem presets to take into battle. Gems 1, 19, and 38 were for offense, 46, 50, and 56 were for defense, 205, 207, and 214 were for meter, 24, 139, and 245 were for Pandora, and 1, 48, and 205 being for those who wanted a balance. This may seem like a lot to remember, but tournament organizers were expected to have these presets ready in advance before events. That way, players wouldn't have to waste time creating all 5 of them on every console. Thankfully, the game's 2013 patch added these presets to the character select screen by default, so if you were one of the few who hadn't dropped the game by then, you were never forced to tinker with gem selections. I'm not sure if there's ever been an official press statement from influential FGC members or Capcom itself as to why the ban was reverted after EVO 2012, and believe me, I tried looking, but my speculation is that it all goes back to one point in particular: simplicity. Imagine you rock up to a tournament and all gems are allowed, even the DLC ones. Not only will this lead to players exclusively selecting the best gems, but it'll also take forever to get them all sorted. It would be total chaos, as anarchy would rule the lands. Conversely, the gem presets are easy to explain, take very little time to set up, and ensure that every player has equal footing. Recent events run by Psycho Blue and Tampa Never Sleeps utilize these presets very well, and they've ended up becoming a tried and true method of handling how players think about gems. Not all of them are useful, as you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who longs for the Pandora gems, but the others aren't bad at all, so I'd recommend figuring out which gem combination best fits your playstyle. Unfortunately, Street Fighter X Tekken's competitive scene was nowhere close to that of Street Fighter IV in terms of popularity, but I'm glad that its community was able to easily handle gems. I've personally run a few tournaments myself, and from a TO's perspective, it's so nice not having to worry about gems when you're running around the room trying to find people. All I have to do is boot into the game, explain that the 5 gem presets are allowed, and just let the players go off to the races. In hindsight, the gem mechanic has no place in what was supposed to be a properly balanced traditional 2D fighting game, but to be honest, I really like its intention. Providing players with a highly customizable feature that influences how they approach battles is quite clever, but its marketing-induced oversaturation and DLC advantages didn't do it any favors. After all, Capcom has never, and most likely will never, attempt anything like this again for their current and future fighting games. The FGC's memory of gems are just far too volatile for this to happen again. Personally, I think they can be loads of fun to mess around with when you're playing casually. Seeing your favorite fighters glow all sorts of colors is a spectacle for the eyes, and this visual effect lends itself well to Street Fighter X Tekken's insane animations. With how the title fell short of Capcom's initial sales expectations, future DLC gem packs were quietly cancelled, but this makes me wonder what they could have looked like. Perhaps there's a universe out there with some super broken gems that caused even more of a firestorm. Either way, gems never had a chance at being accepted by the FGC's most competitive players, but I respect Capcom's ambitions for introducing something that had never been incorporated into the series. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.